Welcome back to Joy Recovery Radio, where we're dedicated to helping couples find healing and hope after sexual infidelity and betrayal trauma. We share real stories, practical strategies, and deep insights to support you on both sides of this difficult journey. We truly believe this message can change lives, and you can help us reach more people by engaging with our content. Wherever you listen, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube, please hit that follow or subscribe button. A quick like and a 5-star review also goes a long way, helping others discover our community when they need it most. Let's dive into today's episode.
So you probably have heard this advice before, just be yourself. That's a common phrase that we hear in our culture. And is this good advice? Is this bad advice? We hear it all the time. You can open up a magazine and there will be some celebrity who's being interviewed, and the interviewer will ask them, well, what advice do you have for life for the readers? And a lot of times their answer will be somewhere around this idea of be true to yourself. Well, is that helpful? What if we don't look like that celebrity? What if our story is nothing like their story? Or maybe you're listening to a self-help audiobook. I enjoy listening to audiobooks, or a podcast, and they're talking about, 10 tips for whatever. And number 3 is be true to yourself. Or you're watching Oprah, she's interviewing someone about a marriage or a divorce or whatever, and the guest smiles and says, well, the most important thing is be true to yourself. And then it pans to the audience and all the heads are nodding everywhere. And this is more than just a cliche. In our culture, it's a creed. It's a mantra. And when I hear it, I have mixed feelings about it. But the question that comes up for me is, well, which self? If I'm going to be true to myself, which self are we talking about here? Because every day I face multiple decisions, and half the time I'm not even sure what I want. Half the time I want to eat a healthy diet. I want to exercise 6 days a week. And I want to look like I belong on the cover of Men's Health magazine. But there's also days that I want to eat a dozen donuts, and I want to do McDonald's for lunch, and I want to end the day by eating a gallon of ice cream as my dinner. So which me is the real me? There's a part of me that wants to get up at 5 a.m., read my Bible, pray, center my mind in the reality of God before I talk to anyone else. But there's also a part of me that wants to sleep in and then have some coffee, skip work, and binge watch Star Wars. So which me is the real me? There's a number of psychologists that argue that even if you and I meet all the criteria for perfect mental health, most of us have more than one, quote, self inside of us. Dr. David Benner, who is a psychologist and a professor, writes, what we call I is really a family of many selves. Underneath this image that we project out into the world, most of us are at least confused because we have multiple desires, plural. And we have these desires that compete inside of us. And some of those desires are bent towards what we know deep down to be good and true and beautiful and life-giving. But some of our desires, which are just as real and they're just as authentic, are bent in the wrong direction, and they're distorted and they're upside down. So we live in this tension, this tug of war. It's called an inner conflict. There's a civil war that's going on inside of ourselves. This tension is nothing new. It is the human condition. And on that note, let's look at this ancient letter that Paul, who was a follower of Jesus, wrote to other followers of Jesus describing this inner conflict. We're looking at in his letter, chapter 4. This letter is amazing. It's nearly 2 millennia old, but it's so good that we're still reading it today. And some of us consider it more than just a letter, that it's inspired. And this is what he says. He says, throw off your old sinful nature. Now, that phrase, throw off, is primarily used for changing clothes. So it's taking off dirty clothes and putting on clean clothes. It is this decisive moment where you renounce your former identity, your former practice, your former way of living. So he says, throw that off, take it off, your old sinful nature. And he says it's corrupted. That word corrupted is referring to a progressive decay. It's not getting better, it's getting worse. In addiction terms, we would call this escalation, that it gets worse and worse and worse. We further disintegrate our lives as we live in this old sinful nature. So he says, throw off your old sinful nature, take it off like a dirty clothes, because it's being corrupted. It's getting worse. It's not getting better. And he says the two things that are causing it to get worse. And these two things are the very two habits that you and I'm willing to bet, have found to be the hardest habits to break. And that is lust and deception, or lust and lying, objectifying others and deceiving others. So he's saying that's our old nature. And it wasn't getting better, it was getting worse. And the reason it was getting worse is because of the lust and the deception that were involved with it. So, man, does it sound like he's talking about addiction. And then he says, instead, let the Spirit renew. So that phrase, renewal by the Spirit, is a picture of something that is ongoing. It's not a one-time thing. It's called a present continuous participle. What that means is it happens and it keeps happening. It is a process. Let the Spirit renew you. So this is God-centered. This is God-empowered. This is not self-powered positivity. This is not a self-help plan. We're dependent upon the Spirit to renew ourself, because our old self was getting worse and worse and worse. We need a power greater than us to renew ourselves. So we are the subject and we're being acted on by the Spirit, by God. So he says, instead, let the Spirit renew. What does he renew? Our thoughts and attitudes. That is the control center of our life. Our thoughts, our attitudes, our values. And then he uses that same phrase that refers to changing clothes. He says, put on. So he says, throw off. So there's urgency. Throw off the old nature, put on a new nature. He's talking about a total replacement. And he ends with this phrase, as God reproduces his character in you. So one of the things that we experience when we take off the old and we put on the new nature that's being renewed by the Spirit in our thoughts and attitudes is that we begin to look more and more like God. His character is being reproduced. It's called the fruit of the Spirit. He's reproducing it in us. He's the one who is creating this inside of us. So, throw off and put on. You throw off your old identity, you put on a new identity. You throw off an old way of life, you put on a whole new way to be human. So the question we really want to wrestle with today, and we're going to cover this next week as well, is how? How do we change? How do we take off the old? How do we put on the new? How do we break out from who we are and who we were and grow into our best self, into who we are becoming? What we're really talking about here is spiritual formation. That's what we're talking about. The word that the Bible uses to describe this is transformation. And it comes from the Greek word metamorpho, which of course is the root of our English word metamorphosis. It's the word used to describe how a caterpillar goes through a metamorphosis, a transformation to become a butterfly. That's the word the Bible uses to talk about our spiritual transformation. We throw off the old, we put on the new. So spiritual formation for our purpose today and next week, this is what we're going to refer to. It is the process, not a one-time event, by which we are transformed to become more like God. And in doing so, we become more like our real self, our true self, who we were meant to be. One of my spiritual mentors, Dallas Willard, defines spiritual formation this way. It's a process of increasingly, little by little, being possessed and permeated by the character traits of God as we walk in the easy yoke of apprenticeship or discipleship with Jesus, our teacher. So here's the plan for the next 2 weeks. We're going to drill down on this idea of spiritual formation. In my recovery, I have tried to re-architect and re-engineer and reorient my entire existence around this idea of spiritual formation. And for me, it has involved three things: presence, pattern, and practice. Let me unpack that. First of all, presence. What I mean by presence is my focus is on maintaining what our program calls a conscious, and I'll add the word consistent, contact with God. Jesus used the word abide. If you abide in me and I abide in you, that simply means to stay connected. Then you will bear much fruit. But apart from me, you can do nothing. So I need to, what Brother Lawrence called, practice the presence of God. That's my first agenda in my spiritual formation. It's not that God ever leaves me. It's that I lose awareness that he's with me. I want to maintain a conscious and aware contact with him, of his presence, to acknowledge him and include him in everything that I'm doing. And then the second element is pattern. When Jesus came, he described an alternative way of living that he called simply the way. And he called the way a narrow path. It is a different way than what the world follows. And it's narrow because few take it. But it's open and invited to everyone. Pattern or path is simply living the way he did, following the way. That's my second agenda in my spiritual formation. And then the third is practice, which is simply spiritual habits that help me experience God reproducing his character in me over time. Practices that I engage in that cultivate his presence, that help me follow his pattern so that I'm becoming more and more like him. That's the goal. So we have two paradigms that we're going to explore. The first paradigm is what I call the drift. And the drift is what we're going to talk about today. And that's how life will shape you without even knowing it. You have been shaped up into this day. It's automatic, it's by default, and you don't have to do a thing. You just have to breathe, and you will be shaped. And then next week, we're going to talk about how do we intentionally engage in spiritual formation. But today, we're going to focus on the first one. We're going to talk about the drift. Next week, we'll talk about the work. By drift, this is what I simply mean. This is how you are formed with little or no intention on your part. All you have to do is wake up in the morning and you will be formed. This is spiritual formation that's happening passively, not actively. You don't have to do anything. You just have to coast and you will drift. So before we dive into this, there's something crucial that I want you to understand. And it's this: spiritual formation is not some quote religious thing. It's a human thing. Every human is being formed automatically. It's part of being human. To be human is to be dynamic, not static. We're always changing. We're always becoming someone. There's one philosopher who put it this way: human beings are like sharks. We never stop moving. And apparently, if sharks stop moving, if they stop swimming, they die. In the same way, we never stop becoming someone. Every minute of every day, you and I are being formed. We're being shaped. To put it another way, we're all disciples of something or someone. We're all being indoctrinated. The question is not, are you a disciple? The question is this: who or what are you a disciple of? Who are you becoming? And really, if you hear nothing else in this talk, just hear this: you are being formed. The only question is, into what kind of person are you being formed? So the theory of change that we're going to use for today and next week is simply this: we're all being formed by three main things, plus time. The first is the stories that we believe. The second is the habits that we practice. And the third is the relationships that we're in. And all of this happens over time and through experience. This is how we're shaped. And we're shaped automatically, passively. There's nothing you have to do. You just have to exist. And you're being shaped by these elements. Let's walk through each one of them. The first one, the stories we believe. Our stories are the lens through which we look at everything. It's our mental map. So the human mind naturally takes something that's complex, like our world, and it turns it into simplicity. So we take the chaos of life, like the news and social media and our own experiences and movies and music, and we take all of this chaos and all of this data and we put it all together into a story, a narrative that helps us make sense of it all. And then we live out of the script of that story. So there's these narratives that we believe in our head, and we live into them, and they give shape to our lives and who we become. So let's take an example. Let's just take one aspect of our life and look at the stories that we believe. For those of us in recovery from sex addiction, I think a topic that would be very relevant is the stories about sexuality. Think about the story that our culture tells you every single day through Netflix, through advertising, through TikTok, through podcast, through friends, through media, through conversations. There is a cultural narrative about sexuality. And have we bought into this story? And how is it shaping who we are? Let's look at just a few stories, just about sexuality in particular. First, there's the pleasure story. That story goes something like this: sex is for personal happiness, and it's for my self-expression. When you buy into this story, the highest good in life is simply feeling good. It's pleasure. It's comfort. It's self-fulfillment. And now you measure your sexual ethics by either consent or enjoyment. The mantra is, if it feels right, then it must be right. And now your body becomes simply a tool for your own gratification. That's the pleasure story. Another story is the romance story. And that is that romance and sexual connection will complete you. It's the myth of the soulmate, that if you just find the right partner, you will finally be made whole by that other human. And in this story, singleness is portrayed as someone who is incomplete or they're lacking. When you look at our movies, our music, our advertising, they all teach this salvation through romance. It's a counterfeit for God's love. Sex and romance become functional saviors in our life instead of God. There's another story that our culture has, and it's the consumer story. And that narrative is this: people exist for my use. We live in a swipe culture, and our swipe culture trains us to view others as consumable experiences, that their body is a commodity. Relationships are disposable. Attraction is a transaction. And our desire becomes detached from covenant with a spouse. People become products for us. That's the consumer story. That's one of the stories our culture teaches. Or finally, there's the science story. The science story is this: you're just an animal. You're just more highly evolved. So our sexuality is reduced to just biology. It's only about reproduction or pleasure. It's just about propagating our species. Love is simply a chemical reaction. That's all it is. And being faithful or being monogamous is unnatural. So this story strips sex of its sacredness, and it leaves it to just being purely mechanical. When you look at the stories of our culture is practically designed to shape men into sex addicts. And I don't say that as some kind of conspiracy theory. What I mean is, in a very real sense, everything around us, technology, media, advertising, entertainment, it is forming us. Remember what we said earlier: to be human is to be dynamic, not static. We're always being formed by the stories that we believe. And if you just wake up and you drift through an average day as a man in Western culture, you are being discipled. You are being indoctrinated every single minute by a system that trains your heart to see women as objects, sex as simply recreation, and desire as something that you should never deny. Well, we've talked about how our culture shapes men and how it forms them towards addiction and isolation. But the truth is, women are being shaped too, just in very different ways. We've talked before about the collective socialization of masculinity. But if you're a woman in our culture, you're also being shaped by the stories that you're being told. From the time that you were very little, you've been told a story about what it means to be female and what it means to be valuable. Let's look at some of those stories. For women, one of the stories is the performance story, which is you are what you produce. Whether it's school or career or parenting, women are taught to perform, to prove that they can do it all. And your productivity is your value. And what that leads to is exhaustion and comparison to other women. Or there's the beauty story. This is a powerful narrative. The mantra is this: you are your body. The female body is commodified in our culture everywhere. Marketing, entertainment, fitness culture, everywhere. Women are told a story that their value is measured by their desirability or their youthfulness or how thin they are. This breeds anxiety, eating disorders, constant self-surveillance, and body shame. Another story in our culture is the comparison story for women. They're told you're never enough. A woman in today's culture is told the paradox that they need to be both powerful and gentle. They need to be both independent but nurturing. They need to be both confident but modest. And while they do all this, they need to look amazing. These contradictions create chronic insecurity and eventually burnout for women in our culture. Don't even get me started on social media. That amplifies and magnifies this effect by offering a constant feed of what a quote better woman is. Here's someone prettier or fitter or more spiritual or more successful. That's the comparison story. Or finally, there's the female version of the romance story. And that is this: for women, your worth is tied to whether you've been chosen or not. Women are often formed to believe that fulfillment comes from romantic success. If you look at our movies, if you look at music, if you look at social media, there is this narrative that, quote, happy ever after is about being desired or being in a romantic relationship. What this does is it shapes self-worth around someone else's approval, not around God's approval for women. So you're expected to meet all of these stories. It's impossible. It's exhausting, and it's forming you. It's shaping how you see yourself, how you see your body, and how you relate to others. And just like men are discipled in our culture towards addiction, women are discipled in our culture towards comparison, constant measurement, constant proving, and often constant hiding.
At joy-recovery.com, we offer personalized recovery coaching to help you move from pain to purpose. We also provide supportive groups where you can connect with others who truly understand. So, whether you're battling addiction, healing from betrayal, or rebuilding a brand new relationship, you're not alone. We can help. Go to joy-recovery.com today.
Jesus tells a better story. He doesn't say to women, be prettier, or be busier, or be better. He says, come to me, learn from me, harness your life to me, rest in me, find your identity and value in me. He restores the worth that the world keeps demanding that women earn. He heals body shame, fear, exhaustion, trauma, loneliness. He calls women daughter, not performer, not product, or not a project. That is the way of Jesus for women. It's not performing, but it's living from a place of love. Let's take a topic that I think everyone listening has been impacted by in our culture. And I'll be sensitive as we talk about this. Let's talk about porn. Pornography is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Wrap your head around this for a moment. The pornography industry is larger than the combination of the NFL, the NBA, and Major League Baseball combined. It is engineered, it is literally engineered to hijack the reward center of your brain. It gives you endless novelty, instant stimulation, and the illusion of intimacy without the cost of love. It's teaching men, and now women, neurochemically, to associate arousal with isolation and screens and control. So when you finally try to have a real relationship with a human, your brain doesn't know what to do with that because the dopamine wiring has been hijacked. This isn't accidental. This is a business model. But it's not just pornography. Mainstream advertising uses the female body to sell everything from hamburgers to pickup trucks. Hollywood scripts teach us that sex is casual, commitment is an option, and marriage is boring. The music industry preaches that we should lust, hook up, break up, and repeat. Even social media is built around the same addictive loop. Dopamine, click, scroll, swipe. All of this is formation. We're all being formed by these stories. What's the result? We live in a generation of men who are constantly stimulated and yet profoundly lonely. We've been trained to chase desire, but we don't know how to chase intimacy, to consume pleasure, but we've lost our character as we've done it, to feed every urge we have, and now we're no longer men of integrity. So hear me real clearly on two things real quick. Number one, this is not an excuse. We can't claim that we became a sex addict because of the shaping of our culture. It was an influence, but we still had a free will. And number two, none of this means that desire by itself is bad. God made desire. Desire is holy at its root. Desire is meant to draw us towards union with our wife and union with God. But when desire is detached from God and spouse, from responsibility and love, desire becomes weaponized. And when an entire culture normalizes that, it forms what's called addicts. Here's the pathetic state of spirituality in men in our culture. We have men who can't imagine life without constant stimulation. Men whose sense of identity and sense of worth and comfort is tied to sexual conquest and sexual gratification. Here's the paradox. We are the most sexually saturated generation in human history, and yet the most relationally broken. And this isn't random, it's systemic. We call our culture's stories about sexuality freedom, but it's actually bondage. We call it self-expression, but it's self-destruction. We say be true to yourself, but you're actually losing yourself, piece by piece, to an appetite for lust that can never be satisfied. That is why Jesus described his way of life as a narrow road. It's not narrow because it's hard to find. It's narrow because few have tried it. He says wide and well-traveled is the superhighway, and that way leads to destruction. So Jesus has a completely different vision for men and women, and we're just looking at one story, one area of our life, sexuality. Jesus shows us that real masculinity is not about conquering women, but laying down our life for our wife. It's not about consuming bodies, but honoring women as an image bearer of God. It's not about control, it's about a covenant with our wife. He teaches us that the body is not a playground, it's actually a temple that he lives inside of. That sex is not a hobby, it's a holy act of union that mirrors his own love. That's the way of Jesus. That's the way of sexuality on his path. So the question is this: which story are we going to believe? Will we believe the story that Jesus tells or the one that our culture tells? Because the stories we believe, I don't care if it's sex, money, power, success, those stories shape the person that we're becoming. The second thing, habits, the habits we practice. Over the last few decades, psychology has shown that human beings are basically a sum of our habits. There's a best-selling book called The Power of Habit, and what that basically says is you and I are little more than the cumulative effect of our daily and weekly routines. In other words, what we do repeatedly, we become. Or to put it another way, the things we do, they do something to us. So here's the tricky part, and I missed this for years. Our habits shape us not mainly through our intellect, but through our heart. Our habits get into our limbic system, our emotional center, and over time, they shape what we love and what we long for. Let me tell you one example from my own life. Coffee. Coffee is the last thing I need when I wake up in the morning. The last thing I need especially is coffee on an empty stomach. It makes my eyes burn. It causes me to be jittery. It causes my heart to race. It causes my throat to dry up. It upsets my stomach if I haven't eaten anything. And there was one phase in my life where I actually gave up coffee and I gave it up for a month. The first 3 days were absolutely miserable. Headaches, coming off of caffeine addiction. But then after the 3 days of misery, I slept better, ended up waking up very alert before my alarm. I had more energy. I had more focus. I was just feeling overall happier. But 2 weeks after the experiment started, I thought, this is amazing. But about a week after the month of giving it up, you know what I did? I got back on coffee. Why? Because I love it. Here's the irony. I know coffee is not really good for me and my biochemistry, but I still start every day with it, including this morning. Why? Because I long for it. My heart is bent towards my AeroPress every morning. How did that happen? How did I become the type of person who loves coffee? Well, it wasn't overnight. When I was in college, I started pulling all-nighters to study for exams. And that's when I started coffee. And I hated it. It tasted awful, but it gave me energy. So I added milk and chocolate and sugar, and it looked more like pudding than coffee. In fact, I couldn't taste the coffee anymore. But over years of repetition, and I cut the chocolate out and less sugar and less milk, over time, I became the kind of person who loves coffee. Why? Because I had a daily habit of drinking it. That's true of all of our habits. The more you do something, the more you want to do it. The less you do something, the less you want to do it. Have you noticed this in your recovery? The less you lust, the less you want to lust. The more you lust, the more you want to lust. It's true in just about every area of our life. The more I eat dessert after dinner, the more I crave dessert the next night. The more I binge watch shows, the more I want to binge watch shows. The more I read my Bible and pray, the more I want to read my Bible and pray. And the less that I do something, the less I want to do it. That's because our habits don't just shape our schedule, they shape our actual desires of our heart. We think we're just watching Netflix, but that is shaping our heart. We think we're just drinking coffee, it's forming a desire in us. So that's bad news for me in coffee, but it's really good news for you and I in our recovery, because it means we could retrain our hearts to desire new things through the right habits. And through spiritual practices, we can aim our hearts in the right direction. So this is what we've covered so far. You are formed first by the stories you believe, second by your habits. Third, we are formed by our relationships. We become like the people we spend time with. Friends, family, co-workers, brothers in recovery. We are deeply formed by the people we spend the most time with. Psychologists, sociologists, spiritual writers, they all agree. You become like the people that you're around. You could put it this way. Show me your 5 closest friends and I'll show you your future. Because that's reality. God made us social creatures. We are designed to imitate. That's how we learn, and that's how we change. Look at teenagers. I've got a 14-year-old right now. He and his buddies, they all start laughing at the same things. They start using the same phrases. They start wearing the same clothes. They start watching the same shows. They start believing the same stories and assumptions about life. All of us like to think that we're original thinkers, but none of us are independent. Most of our opinions are borrowed from someone else, and most of our behaviors were learned by osmosis. Social learning, watching others. That's not necessarily bad, it's human. The question is not whether your relationships are forming you. I guarantee they are. The question is, how are they forming you? What kind of person are you becoming because of the people you're spending time with? We need other people around us that shape us and challenge us and encourage us, that call us out, that call us up. Because who we walk with will determine where we end up. So here is where this hits home. You are already being discipled by your relationships. If the people you spend time with love to gossip, you will slowly become critical of other people. If the people you hang out with are lazy, you're going to drift towards apathy. If they're chasing money or status, you're going to start to measure success with those same metrics. But if you're around people who love God, who repent quickly, who forgive easily, who serve humbly, if you're around people who speak life, who pray, who live with integrity, you're going to start to look like them. You're going to start to talk like them, and you're going to start to want to be like them. C.S. Lewis said that our friendships are both a mirror and a chisel. Our friends are a mirror. They reveal different sides of who we are, but they're also a chisel. They shape who we become. So ask yourself, who are your mirrors? Who are your chisels? Who are the people I'm becoming more like? Because over time, you're going to start to resemble whoever you admire, whoever you listen to, whoever you spend the most hours with. So who's shaping your heart? Who's shaping your habit? Who's shaping your worldview? Relationships are not neutral. They are formational. So one of the most spiritual decisions that you will ever make in your life is, who am I going to do life with? Because we become like who we're with. Jesus himself had a circle of 3. Among the 12 that he shared life with, he had 3 that were the closest: Peter, James, and John. Sociologists tell us that we're only capable of having close, intimate relationships with about 3 to 5 people. When I started recovery, I began to ask God to provide for me, my own circle of 3. 3 men who were healthy, following God, that would answer my call anytime, 24/7. 3 men that I could confess my sin to. They could confess their sin to me because we have an open, honest, intimate relationship. We all need a circle of 3. And those 3 are going to define in many ways who we become. The last thing we're going to look at is that all of this happens over time and through experiences. And that's the tricky thing about formation. It's slow. It's gradual. It's subtle. It's almost impossible to perceive because it's happening through time and it's happening through experiences, both good and bad experiences. Marriage, divorce, having a child, not being able to have a child, success, failure, seasons of clarity, seasons of confusion. Every experience we have, big or small, they are shaping who we're becoming. We're being shaped by everything: our joys, our wounds, our trauma, our routines, our screens, our culture, our friends. And if we're not intentional, those forces will shape us more than God's Spirit does. So this is the simple truth that I want you to understand from today. All of these together, the stories we believe, the habits we practice, the relationships that we live in, and the experiences that we have over time, all of these have formed you into who you are today. And you don't have to do anything special for this to happen. All you have to do is wake up tomorrow morning and breathe. You walk your dog, you check your email, you scroll your phone, you go to work, you buy something, you go to bed. All you have to do is live, and you will be formed by these things. You are becoming someone. So the only question is this: who are you becoming? If you trace the trajectory of your life, if you fast forward 10 years, 20 years, what's the kind of person you're going to be? If today you're in your 20s, what are you going to look like when you're 40? If you're 40 right now, what are you going to look like when you're 60? If you're 60, what does 80 look like? Who are you becoming? And let me close with just a personal moment. I don't talk about my story much. For years, I taught about transformation, but I wasn't being transformed. When I was in my 20s and 30s, I was a minister. I stood on platforms. I opened the Bible. I taught thousands of people. But behind all of that, I was hiding a secret sexual basement. I had an addiction that no one knew about, not a soul. And I would use the words of Scripture not to bring freedom, but to cover the chains that I was in. I did not teach from experience. It was performative. It was deceptive. I used information about the Bible to try and impress people, to control the narrative, and to protect my image. I was a fraud. I had information, but I had no transformation. It wasn't until I experienced D-Day, the day that I hit my true rock bottom, the day that my basement was exposed. Everything came crashing down for me. That day, I received what sometimes we call in recovery GOD, the gift of desperation. For the first time in my life, I became desperate enough to surrender to God. And I decided to tether my life to Jesus for real this time, as if everything in my life depended on it, because it did, and it still does. That day was the death of Roy and his false self. The public persona that I had put together, that I had it all together. And it was the beginning of the real Roy, broken, repentant, and finally honest. And I remember this realization that I had spent years teaching about the way of Jesus, but I was not walking on that path. I was following my own way, the broad path that leads to destruction. I had spoken about grace, but I was living on performance. I was teaching freedom, but I was enslaved. When I get among brothers in recovery, I don't say this from a place of shame, but I feel like I am the chief of sinners among all of you. And it's not because my sexual sins were worse than any of yours. It's because my hypocrisy was. Because I used God's word to hide from God himself. And I experienced a miracle. My exposure, that devastation, became the door to a new birth for me. Our program calls it spiritual awakening. It calls it a psychic rebirth. But that's when I became an apprentice of Jesus. I harnessed and tethered my life to his yoke. He became real to me. That's when he started doing for me what I could never do for myself. He is in the process of transforming my heart, my will, renewing my mind, my thoughts and emotions, retraining my body with its habits and its appetites, my rhythms. He is restoring my marriage. He is restoring my relationship with my kids. He's healing me at a soul level. And I have tethered my life to him starting that day. And I've been learning ever since then that this life with God is not about image. It's about intimacy. And it's not about my performance anymore. It's about his presence. It's not about me pretending to be someone I'm not. It's about being held by him. I can sit here and I can authentically tell you that God is real. His grace is real. His transformation is real. God really does make all things new. That's the invitation for us, to go on that journey. Some of you have been on it longer than I have. Some of you, you haven't started yet. Wherever you are, ask this question: who am I becoming? Next week, we'll look at how do we engage in spiritual formation. We're being formed automatically. How can we be formed intentionally?
That wraps up another episode of Joy Recovery Radio. We hope our conversation today brought you clarity, comfort, or a new perspective on your journey. Remember, healing is possible, and you don't have to walk this path alone. To learn more about how we can support you, visit us at joy-recovery.com. There, you'll find information about our individual and couples coaching practice designed to provide tailored support for both addicts and betrayed partners. You can also explore our various online groups, offering safe and confidential spaces for connection, shared experience, and growth. Thank you for joining us today. Until next time, choose joy.